Hello there, my name is Parin, and today we're going to be installing Gentoo onto a Surface device. Specifically, in my case, this is a Surface laptop, but this will likely work for every Surface device. And without further ado, let's get started. Now, this is actually bare metal. I am SSH'd into my Surface laptop. Alright, so the first thing that we'll want to do is we want to partition the disks. And let's take a look at what disks are there. So I'm doing a dual boot with Windows. So this is the EFI. This is the EFI partition. This is something from Windows. This is the Windows, and this is Windows recovery. So we will make sure not to touch that. So let's start partitioning our disk. Now, if you notice, even though I'm installing Gentoo, I am using a Arch ISO, which you can completely do. The reason that I'm using the Arch ISO is because it has the newest kernel that has the Surface HID merged into it. What that means is that you can use the Surface keyboard without needing an external keyboard. Alright, so let's list out the partitions again. You can see EFI, Microsoft Reserved. We'll go ahead and create a new partition. My Surface laptop has 128 gigs, so I'm gonna create about 42 gigabytes for the root disk. Alright, ext4, remove the signature. And now I'm going to create a swap space. So just let it fill that thing out, and we have 9.7 gigs. It would be overkill, but it's okay. And let's change that type, the last one. Right, we want it to be a Linux, where's that? Linux swap, so 19. Right, print that out again. And now we see, okay, everything is in order. Let's write. Beautiful. Now, the next thing we'll want to do is create a folder in mnt/gentoo. This will be the place where we will mount our root, root partition. So let's format the root partition first. You can format it to whatever you would like. However, I'm doing ext4 just for the sake of simplicity. Alright, beautiful. Now what we will do next is we will download the stage 3 file from Gentoo. So let's go ahead first and mount. Oh, sorry, wait, I forgot to. Alright, let's make the swap partition. Turn the swap partition on that we just made just now. N1P6. The disk names for you might be different, so keep that in mind. Swap on /dev/nvme 0n1p6. Right. Now I already have the Surface. Oh, sorry. I already have the Gentoo stage 3 file copied. You will most likely have to type out the thing yourself. Alright, so let's first mount the thing. Did I mount it? God. NVMe 6. That's P5. That's our root partition. Gentoo. Right. Now that it is mounted, we can now cd into it we will now download the stage 3 file. We get. Alright. Oh, we don't have we get. Alright, okay. So we don't have we get. We can just go ahead and pacman install we get. So let's sync first and install we get. Right, now we will do wget or we get and the stage 3. A stage 3 file is basically, let's just say, kind of like a Linux system. So it is a very minimal Linux system, and in this case, as you can see, I am going with OpenRC. OpenRC is another init system other than systemd. It serves kind of the same function as systemd, but it is more minimal, and it is created by the Gentoo project. And we'll use that. For the Surface compatibility, either systemd or OpenRC will work, so no need to worry about that. Now what we will do is, since we already have the tarball downloaded, we will go ahead and extract it right here, and I'll let you see the command quick. Oop. So it's going to take a while. Alright, I forgot to mention, I assume that you already know how to do the turning off secure boot and booting into the live USB, particularly the Arch ISO. If you do not know how to do that, you can go into the link in the description and to view the first part of that guide. Now, if we ls right here, you will see that it looks kind of like a complete Linux file system. If you ever gone into slash before, just slash, or the root. So I went ahead and also removed the tarball since we no longer needed it. And the next thing that we want to do is we'll want to configure our Make.conf. So if you don't know, everything in Gentoo is compiled, so the settings for those compilations are located in Make.conf. So we're gonna go mnt/gentoo etc portage and Make.conf. I'm using Vim here, but you can go ahead and use Nano or whatever text editor you want. Alright, so you'll see a few things here. There's nothing that we need to change for now. In this part, there's nothing we need to change for now, right? Now, you can read more about what these flags are by going into gentoo.org, the handbook, and you can go read that. Now, right here, I want to apply some optimizations, so you can go ahead and follow me. If you do not follow me right now, it is okay as well. So I'll go ahead and append March equals native right here. What this does is basically make all the packages that you compile be specific to your architecture. And the make ops is also important. So this make ops flag is basically tells how many compilations it can do in parallel. So most likely you want to set this to about the amount of cores that you have. So right here I have that I told it that we can do 7 parallel compiles and keep the load under 7.0. The load is basically how many jobs basically, or how hard your CPU is running. So I want to keep the load under 7. It would also be wise to put this part into it as well. But if you're just starting out, it is okay. For me, I already have a pre-made Make.conf, so I will go ahead and copy that in. Right, so I will go ahead and explain this. So the emerge default ops basically is telling that this would be the command line options that you specify when you emerge. However, I put it in here. So that means when I just run emerge, it will already have all of these things. Now these features, the feature Candy makes the emerge looks a bit nicer. Parallel fetch, as the name suggests, makes it possible for emerge to fetch many sources at the same time. Parallel install makes emerge allow emerge to install at the same time. Sign is to sign packages. Collision protect, that basically prevents package collision. You can copy this part in if you wish. Now this part you may not want to set it like this. The except keywords, normally it would be like this, and this is your architecture. AMD 64 basically means 64-bit. Most of the Surface devices nowadays run 64-bit. And by adding a tilde, if that's what you call it, you are basically specifying that you want to install a unstable version of that package. Now, except keywords, since I've set it in my Make.conf, that applies to every package. So that means every package on my system will be run on the unstable version instead of the stable version. If you want your packages to be unstable, you can simply omit this and your packages will be unstable. However, I do not want that. Accept license, this part is self-explanatory. It basically means that you will accept every license that the package has. And video card. Since the Surface Laptop 2 does not have a discrete video card, I went ahead and put the Intel i965 and Iris part into it, since the Surface Laptop runs on an integrated Intel GPU. And the input devices, that is lib input. I suggest you to put this in your Make.conf as well, because lib input is a newer way to handle input. Right, now I also have this part which basically specifies which Python version I want to use and which Lua version I want to use. You don't have to put that in. But what you absolutely need to put in is this part, which is Grub platforms, EFI 64. Without this, Grub will the wrong version of Grub will be installed. Basically, this way, it allows Grub to know that it is installing on UEFI and on a 64-bit system. Right. Now the next thing that we'll do, since we're done with this file, we can go ahead and WQ, right, quit out of there. If you're using Vim, or if you're using Nano, I believe it's Control X. Right. Now, the next part of the handbook says that you can run mirror select. However, we're not going to be doing that since we're not using a Gentoo ISO. But we are still going to be doing some steps with the handbook, such as this one. So these are just steps taken from the handbook. You can go look at the Gentoo handbook as well. I'll leave a link in the description. Basically, what these two commands that I've just entered does is it prepares the Portage repos, or the repos that it will fetch the packages from. That's all. And the next very important thing that you have to do is this cp dereference resolve.conf. If you don't know, resolve.conf is a file in your system. Every Linux distro has it. It's basically DNS settings. It allows your Wi-Fi to work, basically. Then we will we will run all these commands, basically preparing the Gentoo system, preparing to chroot into the Gentoo system. Or rather, like preparing to chroot into the Gentoo system, because there are files in /proc and stuff like that that has to be present for the Linux distro to work. So the next few commands are also in the same vein, which will basically allow us to just chroot into the /mit/Gentoo. You will have to type this by hand, but I'm just copying this. Right, and also since we are using a non-Gentoo installation, a non-Gentoo ISO or bootable USB, the handbook also tells us to run this command. If you're running a Gentoo ISO, you do not need to enter this command. And now it is time for us to enter into the environment. So let's chroot into /mit/Gentoo using the bash shell. Alright. And source/etc/profile. Now, as you can see, we're actually in the Gentoo system. This lost and found folder was not in the arch root. It was in the Gentoo root. If we scroll up, let's see if that's still there. Alright, not apparently. Right, never mind. So we are now in the Gentoo root. So for the sake of clarification, so we know where we are, we're gonna append this. So we have a chroot right here. Right, let's clear that. And now we want to mount the EFI partition as well. Specifically for me, I want it to be mounted at /boot/EFI, so the kernel images that are created, the Initramfs, do not get stored in the EFI partition. Now we mount, so let's take a look. Normally the EFI partition is at NVMe 0 and 1P1. So you can go ahead and mount that. Mount /dev/NVMe 0 and 1P1 at /boot/EFI. So if we go into EFI now, we'll see that the EFI has been mounted. Alright. The next thing we'll have to do is to sync the Gentoo repo into our own local repos.conf. This is similar to doing a pacman sy or sudo apt get update. It is very similar. So you can just ignore this part and we'll wait a bit. Right, after Gentoo has finished doing its thing, you may see some messages that's saying that it has news that you should read. So to read those news, you can run the command that it shows, eselect news list and eselect news read. But the next thing that we have to do is select our profile. What is the profile, you may ask? The profile is kind of like a pre-configured variables for the use flags, the C flags, and all the other things. Now, what are use flags, you may ask? The use flags is basically a set of functionality that can be configured system-wide. Because in Gentoo, you're compiling your own software, you can select which features to enable. So for example, I can just compile my whole system to not use Bluetooth if I don't want Bluetooth support. Or I can compile without Wi-Fi support as well. This is different from other distros because other distros will compile with everything supported because they want to support as much as much hardware as possible. So let's list our profiles, and the selected profile right now, as you can see, is this. This is default one, and there are a few more profiles that are available. So there's the hardened one, the desktop. If you're running GNOME, then you should go ahead and do GNOME. If you're running GNOME, if you want GNOME with systemd, then go ahead and do that. However, I'm gonna stick to the the stable version. Just simple, easy. I'm gonna stick to that. If you want to change your profile, you would go eSelect Profile and set the number that's on the left. So 24 or something like that. However, I'm not gonna do that. I already have everything that I want. So the next thing you want to do is update every package on your system. You can do that by going boop. Depending on which profile you chose. Oh wow, another circular dependency. Let's see. What is this triggered by? Python 3.10. Oh, 3.10 is released. Interesting. Anyways, I think we can go ahead. Let's see. Can we go ahead and emerge? What is Python dependent on? Pipcrypt. Emerge one shot Python. See if that does it. Python 3.10. Right. So a circular dependency, if you do not know, a circular dependency is basically when a software requires another software, but that software also requires that other software. So I'll be back when it's done emerging. So as you can see, Gentoo has now finished emerging Python. So let's try to emerge world again. Right. As you can see, we can now do this stuff. Right, this is gonna take a while, and the package, as you can see, this part totally depends on what you have installed. So I'll see you when it's done. Now we're back after the @world emerged and everything went well. So now what we want to do next is we want to configure the time zone that we live in. If you're running OpenRC, then you can do the following command. So in here, you'll see a few things. First of all, this part is the continent that you're in. If you're in Asia, you would replace it with Asia and then the capital, such as Bangkok or another capital. For me, this is a time zone, so I'm go ahead and going to run the command. If you want to see which time zones are available, you can go ahead and look here using this command, ls share zone info. So as you can see,
Why the big secret? People
there are
are smart.
Africa, America, Antarctica, and all that stuff.
Panicky, dangerous.
Now, if you're running OpenRC, after you did the echoing right here, after you did this, you want to go ahead and run this command as well. Whoops. Sorry. You want to go ahead and run this command, right? So go ahead and say yes. And now it is configured. However, if you're running systemd, the syntax is quite familiar. However, you're not echoing into anything. And in this part, this is the continent, so Asia, and whatever thing you want to be. However, I'm not gonna run that command because I'm not using systemd. However, if you're using systemd, do not run the OpenRC commands, run just the systemd commands. Now, the next part is locale generation. So we want to get into the locale.gen and hit enter. Now you see here that there is one locale, c.utf8. And first of all, what you want to do is of course, we need a enus. And since I am also, actually, yes, that will be all. So you can also add another language in here if you want to. The syntax is quite familiar, just that part. However, that's all I need. So I'm gonna go ahead and Control O to write the file and Control X to exit. After doing that, what you want to do next is locale-gen. This will generate the locales for you. And depending on how many locales you have, this may take some time. Now, it is time to select your locale. So select locale list. And you will see that we have a few available to us. For me, since I'm an English speaker, I'm just gonna go ahead and set the locale to enus. So just like the other eselect commands, this one is going to be set as well, set for. And now, since we set that command, we want to go ahead and do env update and source the profile once again. So do that. And now our profile is done. The next part is arguably the hardest part of the Gentoo install, which is configuring the kernel. However, before we can configure the kernel on our Surface device, we need to get the source for the kernel. Because our sources is a modified version of the normal Gentoo sources, we will need to add our sources in. So how do we do that? That is called an overlay. So an overlay, you can think of it as like an Ubuntu PPA. Kind of like that. Or if you're from Arch Linux, it's like a custom repository that is outside of the normal Arch repos. Kind of like that. Now, I'll be using a tool called eselect repository. That tool does not come with Gentoo by default, so we'll have to emerge it. So let's emerge app. Let's just emerge eselect -repository and hit yes. This may take some time depending on what you have installed. And we'll come back when it is done. Right, so the eselect repository package installed correctly, and the next thing that we want to do is now enable the Linux-surface repo. So as you can see, eselect repository and enable Linux-surface. And now we have the repo. After doing that, the next thing that we want to do is we want to tell Portage that we want the newest version of the Linux-surface, Surface sources. Surface sources is the kernel itself. So, as we discussed in the Make.conf file, adding this tilde in front of your Arch makes you get the latest package, but it is also unstable. If you do not want the latest package, if you do not want the unstable version of the package, you can omit this line. However, I do, so I am going to be keeping this line in. I'm going to be running this. Oop. And then finally, we can emerge the surface sources. Section, blah, blah, blah. Oh, oops. We forgot to emerge sync, didn't we? Emerge --sync. This is what you would do to update the repos. So let's run that first. And hit yes because we want to sync. And right, we need Git support. We forgot to install Git. All right, whoops. So what we also need Git. Git is basically a tool, version control tool. So we need that in order to install the Surface sources. So let's emerge Git. Oh my goodness. All right. So let's emerge dev-vcs-git and hit yes. And I'll be back when it is done. Right, so now that we have Git installed, we can go ahead and sync the Linux-surface repo into our device. So emaint sync r linux-surface. Right, now we have the Linux surface. We should be able to install it now. So let's do that, and it will pull in some dependencies, as you can see. Just hit yes. Right, now after you have finished emerging the surface sources, you will want to you'll want to select the kernel. And you may also see some messages when emerging the surface sources saying that it is unsupported by Gentoo security team, and that is indeed correct because this is a modified version of the package to include the surface patch set. So if you have any issues with these, please don't report them to Gentoo. Instead, report them to my GitHub. I will link that down below. And so we can first list out which kernels we have by doing eSelect kernel list. And we have one kernel, and that is currently selected. It might not be for yours. If so, ensure that it is selected by doing eSelect kernel set 1. And 1, the number comes from this part. So if you see it again, the star specifies that it has already been selected. And now we can navigate into cd, usr, src, and Linux. And right now this is the Linux kernel. If we go ahead and run make.conf, this is similar to make menu.conf, however I just prefer nconfig. Right, so this is the .config file, basically where all of your configuration for the kernel is going to be located. However, we are not going to be using this file, as I have a pre-made file that is basically pre-configured already. You can use this as a base for your Surface laptop or whatever, or you can make adjustments or use it as is because it works as is as well. So let's go ahead and download that pre-made file by going to git.io and jrw9y. You can navigate into your browser to see that it is actually just a kernel config and not anything dangerous. And you have this jrw9y file. This is actually the kernel config. We can go ahead and cat that out if you want to see. So here it is, the kernel config. And let's rename that jr file into .config. So make nconfig and make menu.config will know that this is the kernel config. Now if we once again run make nconfig, you will see that it looks the same. However, there are some differences, such as the Microsoft Surface platform specific device drivers are already enabled, and you can see them all right here. I do not need the DTX daemon, so since I'm running a laptop. If you're not running a laptop, if you're running a Surface Book, then you need the DTX daemon. Let's see what else I do need. Alright. The other thing that you have to make sure is that file systems. If you're installing this on a XFS or Btrfs file system, make sure that you have support compiled as well. And yes, since I'm running ext4, just pure ext4, I have that enabled already. The other thing that you want to make sure is that your network. Oh, whoops, wrong. Hold on. Where is that? Locate. Wireless. Nope. Hold on. Device driver. Port. And alright, let's see. Is it wireless? Right, wireless one. Nope. Not that one. Wireless LAN. Okay, this one. So you want to make sure that you have support for your Wi-Fi card compiled into here as well. Since I'm using a Surface Laptop 2 that has a Marvel Wi-Fi card. If you do not know which Wi-Fi card you have, you can go ahead and exit this first. Let's save that. And we can know which Wi-Fi card we have by, firstly, we need to emerge LSPCI. Oh, whoops, sorry. wrong command. That was the actual command. Was it PCI utils?
People are smart. They can handle it.
A person is smart. People are dumb,
Yep.
panicky, dangerous.
And I
animals,
already
and
have
you
it
know
installed, but if you do not, just go ahead and hit Y to emerge it. Once you emerge PCI utils, you will have access to LSPCI. And LSPCI, you can go ahead and run lspci-k, and you will see that it just outputs kind of all the PCI devices that you have. What we're looking for is Ethernet controller. Ethernet. Here, as you can see, Ethernet controller, Marvel technology. And so you want to make sure, you want to take note of the vendor as well as the Wi-Fi card number. So let's go back into our nconfig, and this time let's make sure that network and wireless LAN. And as you can see, I have this enabled. If you're running Intel, then you would go ahead and enable Intel. However, I am not. And that should basically be it for all the kernel options that you have to worry about. Once again, you can actually let's say you can use this as a base for all your configurations that you want to do in the future, but this is basically like some defaults to help you get started. And now we can go ahead and compile the kernel with make-j8 and make modules_install. So make normally you can run just make, however I'm specifying make-j8 just to tell make to use 8 jobs or use up all the 8 cores of the PC. Right, so hit enter and just let it compile. Right, those 2 commands finish, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the kernel by running make install. Our next step would be to basically generate an Initramfs. I will go into that in more detail later. However, in the kernel options, if we can make nconfig once again, and you will see right here that I've set the kernel compression mode to LZ4. That is what I personally use. And to use LZ4 to compress, we need the LZ4 package installed. So right here, just emerge LZ4, and I once again already have it installed. So you can, if you're using that specific kernel that I use, you will also need to install this. So you can just hit yes here. However, I have already done that, so I will not be doing that. However, we aren't done yet, because Surface devices also need an Initramfs. What is an Initramfs, you may ask? An Initramfs is basically a teeny tiny Linux environment that loads before your real Linux environment. And what this teeny tiny Linux environment does is find your Linux kernel and load that thing up. So Surface devices need this Initramfs, although some other devices that are not Surfaces don't need it. Surface devices do need it. And to generate that Initramfs, we're going to use this Gentoo tool called GenKernel. So go ahead and install that thing. Hit yes. Right, so that finished emerging beautifully. And now we need to install, we have to build the Initramfs. We can do that by going GenKernel. So that's the command that we just installed just now, GenKernel. And install, install. And install is a option. And we also have to pass in our kernel config. So we're gonna go ahead and do kernel-config equals, and the path to our kernel config is in usr. Let me see, is that the correct path? usr/src/linux, if I can spell, and .config. It is essential that you specify this option, otherwise the Initramfs may not work. And behind this, you want to specify Initramfs. Oop. This will take some time, but everything should work out completely fine. Once again, if you have any problems about the kernel, please report them to the GitHub link below. Right, so as you can see, Gentoo kernel compiled the thing nicely. And let's see. Right. Next thing you want to do is also emerge Linux firmware if you do not have it already. Linux firmware. This is essential to basically stuff working on your Surface device. If you see this R, it means you already have it. R is kind of like reinstall, so you don't have to. So I'm gonna hit no right here. And the next thing we want to do is configure this system. Namely, we want to configure the fstab or fstab, whatever the file is. Right. Now, if you don't mind, I would like to emerge Vim real quick. I am having a pain with the nano. So let me emerge Vim real quick, and I'll come back when the Vim is done, or if it finishes quickly. Right, okay, Vim emerged, and now we can basically go ahead and do our stuff we have to do. So in distros like Arch, you can simply run the commands such as, what was it? Gen-fstab, I can't remember the kernel, but basically, I can't remember the command, but basically it will create the fstab for you. The fstab file is basically things to auto mount. So let's see. You can use two things for fstab. You can use the UUID, or you can go ahead and use the actual dev. I'm gonna go ahead and use the actual dev because I'm sure that I will not be plugging in NVMe drives during my boot time. But if your device is something like dev SDA, be careful to not plug any devices during boot time. Otherwise, the Initramfs, your Linux distro may decide that is SDA1 and mount all the file system wrong. So just make sure. But since I'm using an NVMe drive, there's no need for that. So let's just go into Vim. If you're using Nano, just continue using Nano. However, I want to use Vim. So vim etc/fstab. Boop. And you can actually see the syntax down here. It is like this, like so. You can also select by label, you can see, or UUID. I'm gonna go ahead and use just pure dev. So first of all, I want to mount dev NVMe 0 and 1p, N1p E5, and that has to be mounted as at slash. So boop boop, mounted at slash. It is a ext4 file system, and the options are Noah time. You can append more, however, I'm just gonna stick to Noah time for now. Boop, and 1. And the next thing that we have to mount is the EFI. So dev EFI partition, if you remember, is located on partition 1. So, and our mount point is actually /EFI. The file system was vfat, was it? I think so. vfat. Boop boop. And the mount options let's just go defaults and no time. Boop. And 0, 0. Or 0, 2. You can look at the handbook linked below. The Gentoo handbook, the like official handbook to see. And we also want to mount our swap, which is located, for me, is located on P6. So none and swap. I'm just following the top commands up here and 0, 0. Right. Ensure that all of those things are correct and save the file and quit. Next thing you will want to set is the host name. The host name can be set by going into vim or nano, depending on what editor you want to use. conf.d and hostname. Hostname. Oop. So my host name is, let's just awesome surface, why not? And out of that. And next thing is alright, here. So at this part, we want to configure the host files. So go ahead and vim into etc/hosts. Right, here it is. Let's see if that's configured for us. So localhost, right? This part has to be changed to your host name. Mine was awesome surface. And let's see. Yeah, and this is also
Humans, for the most part, don't have a clue. They
Surface.
don't want or need one either. They're happy. They think they have a good beat on things.
But why the big secret? People are smart. They can handle it.
A person is smart. People are dumb,
Okay.
panicky, dangerous animals.
And next
you
thing
know
we
it.
want to do is set the root password. So go ahead and do passwd. And I'm gonna enter my password here. And enter it again. Boop. Right. Now, in order to get network working, we need to install the tools. If you're just gonna go exactly as this guide says, I'm gonna be using Network Manager. It is the most reliable I have found so far. So let's emerge Network Manager. Let's see, and alright, add those changes. Let me see, introspection on modem manager. So let's not merge those packages yet. Rather, let's make some changes to our Make.conf, because I don't need this modem manager or PPP or Wext. So I'm going to show you an example on how to configure this. So you can go ahead and go into our Make.conf. And so I want you to keep this in mind, and let's get into our Make.conf. Whoops, wrong file, sorry. Let's see /portage and Make.conf. Right, there you go. Features here. So you most likely will not have use value. So just go ahead and do use equals this, and you can go ahead. Since I do not need Wext, I will remove Wext and PPPP or whatever that is. And was it modem manager? Modem manager. Alright, now that's removed. So this was before we configured our use flags, and now let's try to emerge it again, this time with our use flags enabled. Or disabled rather. So as you can see, all the things that are enabled right now are Wi-Fi, and that's all. Modem manager is disabled, and so on and so forth. Now let's merge these packages in and click yes. This will take some time because it's Network Manager is a huge program. Other alternatives to Network Manager are things such as Conman. I haven't had a good experience using Conman. WPA supplicant, I would say, is also a viable alternative. However, I found the command line interface to be way less intuitive than one of Network Manager. Alright, let's just wait for this emerge to finish then. Right, so Network Manager finally finished emerging. Now we can go ahead and enable the service that tells Network Manager to start on boot. So we can do that. If you're running OpenRC, go ahead and do this command: rc update add Network Manager to default. If you're running systemd, you can go do this command: systemctl enable Network Manager. However, I am not running systemd. Right, so the next thing that Gentoo wants us to do, hold on. Alright, here. We also have to configure our init. This step is only used if you're running OpenRC. So let's go ahead and view some stuff in rc.conf right here. So this is the global OpenRC configuration settings. One of the things that you may notice is that OpenRC starts up way slower than systemd, and that's because systemd starts everything in parallel, and the default is that OpenRC does not do that. So let's turn that on, and you can ignore that part where it says potentially lock the boot process. I personally have not gotten any locks or anything, so I think it's fine. And this is the option that you want to configure if you want your system to boot faster. And the next thing is hardware clock. So allow me to edit that file. sch-reclock. Hold on, what is that thing again? Oh, conf.d /h-reclock right here. If you're doing a dual boot with Windows, it would be better to right here. If you dual boot with Windows, then you should set your clock to local. I'm doing a dual boot, so I'm gonna set that to local. And I also want the clock to sync with hardware and software with hardware. So exit out of that once you did your thing. And the next thing is we're going to be installing some tools. So the handbook tells us that we can install system loggers, and there are a few that we can choose from. However, if you're running systemd, you do not need to install one. I also won't be installing one because I don't, personally for me, I do not have a use for a logger. And the next thing that it wants us to install is also a cron daemon. I also do not have a use for a cron daemon. File indexing, as the handbook wants us to do, is install this. It says it will improve some file indexing. We can go ahead and install that if we want to. So allow it to emerge for a few seconds. Right, it should be done very soon. And the next thing that we'll want to install is the utilities to basically interact with our file system. If you're using a file system such as ext4, you want to go ahead and install this package, emerge e2fs progs. And let's see. Alright, we already have it installed, so that's fine. There are also other packages for xfs, btrfs, or stuff like that. Right. Now at this point we come where we need to configure our bootloader. So the bootloader that I recommend is going to be Grub. So let's go ahead and emerge Grub. Also, please ensure that you actually have the configuration option that I did in the beginning of the video when we were configuring the Make.conf. please make sure that you have this Grub platforms right here before you emerge Grub. All right. Now let's emerge Grubs. Whoops. All right, wrong thing. Emerge Grub, and 2. This 2 at the back means that we want to use Grub version 2. So let's do that. And hit yes. Now it may take a while for Grub to emerge. Right, Grub finished emerging, and now we're going to be installing Grub into our EFI. So let's go ahead and run Grub install -- target, and our target is going to be x86_64. That means 64-bit and then dash EFI, sorry. We also have to specify a EFI directory. And if you remember, we mounted our EFI directory in /boot and /EFI. So specify that. Also make sure that you specify that correctly. And boop. Right, Grub install. I may have typed that wrong. Oh, right, it's not a, right. My apologies. Grub - install. It's gonna take some time. And after that's done, you can go ahead and run this command. What this command will do is basically scan your file system for the Initramfs and add them to Grub. Check. Okay. OS Prober will not be executed. So, because I'm doing a dual boot of Windows, I'm going to emerge OS Prober, so Grub will find Windows as well. So let's emerge that. Yep, dude. Let's go. Let's see. So it found our VM Linus and Initramfs image. And right, this part. We want to add them. So let's copy that first. We need to add this to the /etc/default grub in order to make it detect other systems. All right. It's almost done. All right. Okay. Looks like it re-emerged Grub once again. All right. Now we want to add this grub disable OS prober equals false to our etc/grub. Allow me to copy that real quick, and we're gonna vim or nano into default grub. So let's go down there, go to the bottom line and boop, put that in there, and write the file and quit. Now once we run this grub Make.conf once again, OS prober should now run, and let's see, OS prober. All right. Okay, cool. Now, that is all. That is it, guys. Now, what you want to do is exit out of the chroot, or do whatever you want to do first, and then exit out of chroot. Boop, right there. And then
Humans, for the most part, don't have
CD
a clue.
to home.
Won't want or need one either. They're happy. They think they
Unmount all of
Good
the
beat.
things that we mounted before chrooting. So
Why the big secret?
run this
People are
command.
smart. They can handle it.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky,
Unmount
dangerous animals, and you know it.
Gentoo, M&T Gentoo. And finally, it is time, guys. Hit reboot. There are a few things that you can do after this. You can finalize, you can create your own user and stuff like that. But now, your Gentoo should be beautifully booting. And for that, I want to congratulate you. This video took a long time to make, so I would really love it if you could give me a like and subscribe. Thank you very much.